here today with Brother Chris Hodapp. He's a Masonic author and the man behind Freemasons for Dummies. Brother Chris, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Juan. I appreciate it.
We've spoken in the past, and we have a very similar outlook to the impact that Freemasonry can have in the life of men around the world. I wanted to dig a little deep into what got you started. Many of the brothers I meet name you as one of the early influences in their Masonic career. So I would like to learn a little bit about how you were influenced and how you got started in Masonry.
Sure. No one in my family, to my knowledge, was ever a Mason before. I grew up in a Catholic family, and it wasn't something that was denigrated in any way. Nobody ever talked about it. My family didn't know anything about it. My wife, her father had been a Freemason in Indiana for over 50 years, and then he and his wife decided to retire to Dallas, Texas. And he passed away down there, and so Alice and I went down to arrange for his funeral. And so it's a Sunday night, the funeral is on a Monday, and it's like 6 o'clock in the evening. So Alice said, you know, Dad was a Freemason, and I think they do some kind of a funeral thing. I think I read that somewhere. And I said, yeah, I don't know anything about it. So I pulled out the Dallas phone book. They still had phone books at that time, and it was about that thick, and I started going through and calling any Masonic lodge that I could find. And God love lodge secretaries. I found one working late on a Sunday night, told him the situation, and he said, wow, this is awfully late. I don't know if there's anything I can do. And he said, give me the information, I'll see what I can do by tomorrow morning. And we didn't hold out a whole lot of hope. We didn't really give it a second thought. We figured, well, that's all right, we tried. And we got to the funeral home the next day, and we had this enormous room in the funeral parlor because they had they had hundreds of friends down in Texas when they were together. And Bob belonged to, you know, the VFW and the American Legion and, you know, all kinds of different fraternal groups. And so we figured, you know, of all these hundreds of friends they had there, a lot of them would show up for the funeral, and nobody came. I mean, nobody. It was us, it was the family, it was a couple of neighbors, and nobody. But 10 Freemasons showed up. 10 Masons who didn't know him, had never met him, didn't know the first thing about him, didn't bother to call the Grand Lodge to make sure that they were doing things right, didn't call the Grand Lodge of Indiana to make sure that he was a paid-up Mason, didn't go through the dead guy's wallet to make sure he had a paid-up dues card. All they knew was that the family of a Mason had called them late on a Sunday night wanting their help, and they put on a funeral service that was far more moving than anything that the rented minister said, who kept mispronouncing his name. And when it was all over the next day, we were flying home, and I looked at my wife and I said, that's something I got to be a part of. We don't always realize what we as Freemasons do, how that can touch others in a million different ways. And that's why it's so important that we do things well, that we give the best example of what Freemasonry is. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You go out in public, you are the Freemasons to people that you meet on the street. And because you never know when you're going to touch somebody that way.
You know, you often hear that the character of a man is pretty much illustrated by how he behaves when no one's watching.
Right.
And that's a great example. You're doing something here for someone you don't know.
Right.
And you leave such an impression that you change the course of one man's life.
Right, right. And look at the cascade that led to, okay? So that happens to me. I join a lodge, I join a struggling lodge that's on the ropes that, you know, that everybody's predicting is going to close. Within 3 years, it's turned around, and because of the people that we touched in the lodge, and because of the things that I touched as a Mason, when the offer to do Freemasons for Dummies came around, the Grand Master in Indiana said, I got a guy just dumb enough to write that book. And that led to literally over 100,000 men who have read this book, and they contact me and they said, I read your book, and that's why I joined.
That has to be so fulfilling to hear that the work that you do in private you don't get any feedback as an author, as a writer. You're creating something that comes out of you, and you put it out into the world. And I would imagine that hearing back that actually someone's not just reading it, but it's making adjustments in his life because of it.
Right.
That is
and all because that secretary picked up the phone.
Wow. Now, with that in mind, what would you say to a brother that perhaps listens to our conversation and that maybe he feels that his lodge is just crossed the line? It's just there's no turning back from the depth in which it encounters itself, or feels that whatever effort he makes can't make a difference to change the course of his lodge. What would you say to that brother?
I contend that every single Mason has the ability and the power within himself to change his lodge, to change the fraternity. I know so many men who have made a huge difference in this fraternity because of the one great idea that they had and they followed through with it, and that they wouldn't take no for an answer because it was something they believed in that had to be done. If you find yourself in a lodge that is in trouble, if you find yourself in a lodge that is really on the ropes, don't give up on that lodge. Get in there and change it. Take it on your shoulders. Don't be the bellyacher that says somebody ought to do it because somebody is person or persons unknown. That's you. Prove that it could be the proof of that. Be the proof that it can work.
Leading by example, of course, is something that you often hear, but it is one of those most efficient ways to really catalyze that energy and change a positive thought into some real action.
Sure. I get very frustrated with the direction that so many lodges and so many grand lodges have gone, where, just in the 20 years that I've been a Mason, going from grand lodges that have no cipher, no written material at all, to then doing single letter ciphers, to then doing written out ciphers, to doing, to handing a guy, here's the ritual, go home and learn it. And that has been such a horrible change because the way this was designed from the very start was one-on-one. You're my mentor. You're the face of Freemasonry to me. My questions, I ask you, you answer them, we discuss, we become lifelong friends. If you've ever been to Pennsylvania and you see a Master Mason degree in Pennsylvania, it's very different from most of the Preston Webb work that's done in most lodges. That part, until about 5 or 6 years ago, of the master's part, the Master Mason degree, is enormous. It's over an hour of nonstop memorized talking. It would take men years to learn that part from a mentor, one-on-one. I mean, imagine that commitment. People were just as busy then. People had just as many problems then. People were just as nervous then about, how their life was going and whether kids were getting expelled from school and, and the wife didn't want him to leave that night and all those things. There's nothing new about that. That was the kind of commitment that it took. And those men who formed that bond as mentor and student of that mentor, that friendship will never go away.
Mm-hmm. And it's beautiful. I had the pleasure of actually going to Pennsylvania a few days ago and sitting through Master Mason degree. And it is impressive to see a man speaking these. He's not just reciting what he learned. He has passion behind it. There is the wisdom that's included in it is amazing. And the actual master that was performing the Master Mason degree, he actually had not done it in 7 years. So this brother not only learned it 7 years ago, now had to go and refresh it all and deliver it.
Right.
It takes that effort, but it's not in vain.
The most recent book that I wrote was called Heritage Endures, and it was written for the 200th anniversary of Freemasonry in Indiana. But the book itself is not just here is some Indiana history and Huntington Lodge did this in 1910. It isn't that. I used Indiana as an example for Grand Lodges throughout the United States and the changes that happened principally in the 20th century. And when you stand back and you look at history is what happens when you're not paying attention. And when you stand back and look at the history of the last 50 years, of the last 25 years, of the last 10 years, and you stand back in the distance and you can see what the domino effect has been of some of the changes we have made, we haven't really thought a lot of those changes through. It's very frustrating to me. I always make the joke that the most abused line in the entirety of Masonic ritual, it's the internal, not the external qualification. That's an excuse, and so many lodges use it as an excuse for sloppy work, for a tumble down temple that obviously shows that you don't care. For sloppiness and degree conferral, for all kinds of things. It winds up getting trotted out as an excuse. And if I could change one thing, it would be that. The two things I would change. I'd get rid of that dumb line, and I would get rid of the line that says, don't let your zeal for the institution lead you into argument with others. It's like, no. We're on the defense now. We're in, this is a period of time that is kind of unique because we're pretty lucky in the United States. We don't deal with a lot of anti-Masonic issues the way they do in Europe. It was interesting in the late 1980s when the internet was when online discussion boards and online bulletin boards were first starting to take hold. And there was this very, very quick flare-up of anti-Masonic feeling on the internet. And a lot of Grand Lodges responded by putting defenses of the fraternity on their websites, the few that had websites at that time. We really haven't had to deal with that in this country. They deal with it every day in Britain. They deal with it every day in France. They deal with it every day in Italy. To a certain extent in Spain, and we're pretty lucky in that. But we have the other problem that the most recent survey that the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction did shows that 80% of people have heard the word Freemasons. They know the word exists. They don't know what the hell it is, but they know it exists. But less than 3 out of 10 people know what the values, what the ideals, what the philosophy is. They don't know what it means.
I'm glad that you bring that up because among the different things that you do for Masonry, including writing through books and including your traveling, going to conferences and going to different lodges and speaking about the craft, there's one resource that I personally found to be very valuable and sometimes goes by without the necessary price that I think it deserves. And it's your website where you share some of the news and events, things that are happening in Masonry. And it does share what's happening in Masonry for Masons, but it can also be a resource, an authoritative, you're presenting something that is with facts. You're showing documents, you're showing, conversations. I would like to hear a little bit about you. What kind of feedback are you getting about your work through that? Have you seen any positive, negative, any kind of resistance? What would you say is the take on that?
The blog site is funny. The blog site originally started back in 2006. Just as a sheer, self-promotion website. I was just trying to flack the book. And let people know that it was out there. And it very quickly became a place for me to put ideas, sort of keep them there so I didn't forget about them. And then it became, it got more and more popular, and now, depending on the day, it'll get a minimum of 3,500 people look at it and as high as 20,000. And I mean, that's just daunting to me. But I think it's important when I post stories on that, I really don't like telling the downside of what's going on in lodges or grand lodges, or, you know, I don't want to dwell on that stuff, because I've long had a philosophy that anybody can sit on the edge of a bar stool going, you know what's wrong with this fraternity? Yes, we all know what's wrong with the fraternity. I really don't want to talk about what's wrong with the fraternity. I want to talk about what's right with the fraternity, what we can, you know, and if there are deficiencies, how do we fix that? And one of those aspects is, if everybody's telling you you're laying in a coffin, then you beat on the coffin lid to let them know you're still alive. I just, you know, I get frustrated that you'll watch people who join the fraternity and they get super excited and they want to be involved in everything, and, you know, anything that's a dues card and a pin, I'm in, you know, and they go on, you know, 4 years of degree tourism and, you know, join everything in sight, and then suddenly they start showing up to meetings and people start making them officers, and within 5 years or less they're burned out and they get frustrated and they walk away. You never hear from them again. And I didn't want to be that guy. The fraternity is too important to me to do that. And so, you know, I'm a real strong believer in sharing ideas. We had a saying in the advertising business: where do good ideas come from? Somebody else. Try everything. When that doesn't work, try something else, and you know, steal ideas and claim them as your own. When I was on my way to being master of a lodge, I actually had a guy say, you know what, you'll do fine if you hide the problems that you're having from the guy behind you. You'll breeze through it. And it's like, are you crazy? Are you crazy? You know, if it's a problem, let's solve it.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier today about men joining the fraternity and having that incredible energy and trying to go through the degrees super fast and getting involved in every single appendant body, pretty much burning the candle at both ends. Although I understand the enthusiasm and that passion to really dig into Freemasonry, we definitely don't want to see them burn out and perhaps cheat themselves out of being able to apply some of these lessons to their life. So what would you say to that brother who has that energy? How can they contain, direct, repurpose that enthusiasm?
Do a lot of study before you start joining other things, because you have a lifetime to join all the other appendant bodies. You have a lifetime to get involved in any direction you want to go into in Freemasonry, whatever your interests are. But don't do it prematurely, because, you know, the old joke of, you know, the sign of a Master Mason, the word of a Master Mason really is no. You know, you need to learn that to not get pushed too hard. Now, having said that, okay, I benefited tremendously from being in a lodge that was ready to close. I benefited from the fact that it was very analogous to my own situation in college, where you know, I went to USC Film School, where it was an unlimited budget on everything, and then I went to a college, LA Valley Community College, that had no budgets, but the requirements were all the same. But you had to learn basic craftsmanship, because you couldn't just throw money at it. And a Masonic Lodge is much the same way. If you don't have endless resources, you got to work harder. You got to think harder. You got to be more inventive about the things that you're doing. And in many ways that can help, as long as you don't walk in with unreasonable expectations. If a lodge isn't meeting your expectations, that's okay. Help to see that it does meet your expectations. Make it the lodge you wanted to join in the first place. And if you're always beating your head against the wall, and they're just never, if it's one of those hospice lodges that is just never going to change, and they'd rather, you know, die than change anything, that's okay too. Transfer out and find another. Don't just walk away. Don't just walk away. because this fraternity is too good to let a single situation make you flare up and go, well, I'm done with that.
I like that because they would be turning their back on their own potential of perfecting their action, as opposed to, yeah, they can find a fissure in the stone they're working on.
Sure.
It might be time to find a different stone or find a different tool that can help them perhaps bring that to closer to perfection. So I appreciate the encouragement. Before we say goodbye, I wanted to hear from you your opinion about the progression of how men consume information. You started writing your books, and you've spent some time with your blog, and we see the evolution where even now you're an active participant in some of the popular Masonic groups on Facebook and different social media. So I would like to hear, how do you feel about capturing that essence of the craft and efficiently putting it in a format that the modern man can consume it?
All right. Here's the challenge we face, okay? As you look at demographics and you see the huge and growing percentage of single-parent households, okay? Usually a single mom raising a single kid without brothers and sisters, and we are now multiple generations removed from the height of the fraternity. What that means in practical terms is we don't have the grandfathers, the fathers, the aunts, the uncles, the next door neighbor, the aged professor that belonged to the fraternity all those years ago, and tells kids about that and passes along that shared cultural knowledge. Now, the popular culture has taken on that role, for good or ill. Dan Brown did us all a big favor with his novels. God knows he did the publishing business great favors, because every publisher in the world decided they were going to tie into Dan Brown's whatever he's writing about next is going to be about the Masons. And so that was why you got this big flood of Masonic books. But the popular culture is taking on that role because we don't have that shared cultural knowledge that passed along. So I think documentaries about the fraternity are vitally needed. We need to tell the truth, tell the story about Freemasonry. Get out there, tell the world that we are, a legendary, mythical organization that lives in a very practical world. You get people that join because they want it to be spooky, and they leave because it isn't spooky enough. But by and large, people are more practical than that, and people understand that. You get people who join it because they want it to substitute for a church, and we're not substituting for a church. But when you boil it all down, the bulk of people who join today are joining because of what they see in the popular culture. So documentaries like this, documentaries like the 5-part series that was done for Sky News for the 300th anniversary of the United Grand Lodge of England last year, the DVD that's around Terra Masonica, all these documentaries, the UGLE documentary is in rotation now on Netflix and is more popular than anybody had thought it would be. I'm seeing more and more people sending, cold contacts to me and other places saying, hey, I saw this on Netflix, I'm curious about it. So you never know when those things are going to sneak up on us, and so as long as we're prepared to deal with that, I think it's great.
Really, Chris, thank you for what you've done to help us be prepared for when people are starting becoming curious about the fraternity. Thank you very much, because you've been an influence to me and many brothers, as I know. So thank you very much for what you do and for your generosity with the time.
Thank you, Juan. I appreciate it.